The mist wrapped around the road like a thick veil on that silent night. The air was so cold it seemed the world had forgotten how to breathe. On Willow Hollow Bridge, old and tucked away beyond the edge of Fairbrook, a solitary figure moved slowly. Sarah Mitchell, a middle-aged woman with heavy steps of someone carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The wooden boards beneath her feet creaked softly, the only sound in the stillness. Sarah walked slowly, gazing at the horizon where the moon was trying unsuccessfully to break through the thick layer of clouds. Her eyes reflected the weariness of someone who had lived many lives in one, and her body bore the marks of a silent battle against time and circumstances. In Maple Grove, where she lived, Sarah was known for her composure and determination. A retired literature professor, she lived alone in a modest house, surrounded by books that told stories of heroes and villains, of loves and losses, of hopes and disappointments. After her father had passed away 3 years ago, she had become a cocoon, protecting herself from the outside world. "I need to start over," she murmured to the wind, not expecting a response. That night, something had changed in Sarah. After years of feeling invisible, buried beneath debt, deadlines, and the relentless weight of loneliness, she had made a decision. Her struggle was quiet, constant, and she never spoke of it. She simply endured. Until that night. In a moment of exhaustion and silent despair, Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The wind blew stronger, as if it wanted to carry her away. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed something moving among the damp bushes. A golden retriever was watching her. His golden coat was soaked and dirty, and his eyes held no anger, only sadness and something deeper. A quiet, almost human-like conviction. The dog approached slowly, limping slightly on his right front paw. "Are you lost too?" Sarah asked, surprised by the softness in her own voice, unused for so long in addressing another living being. The dog stopped a few feet away from her, sitting on his hind legs, just watching. There was no collar, no identification tag, just an abandoned animal like so many others in the small town. Sarah felt something different in that moment, an inexplicable connection with this being who, like her, seemed to have lost his place in the world. Without thinking too much, she extended her hand. "Come," she called softly. "It's too cold for us to stay here." To her surprise, the dog got up and walked over to her, touching his wet nose to her palm. It was a gentle touch, almost hesitant, as if asking for permission. That night, which had begun with dark thoughts on Willow Hollow Bridge, ended with Sarah bringing home an unexpected companion. In her silent house's kitchen, she offered water and leftovers from a roast chicken to the animal, who ate with the gratitude of someone who hadn't seen food in days. "You need a name," said Sarah, watching the dog settle on the worn carpet in the living room. "How about Banner?" The dog perked up his ears upon hearing the name, as if approving. And so, in the silence of that house for so long inhabited only by memories and regrets, an unlikely friendship was born. What Sarah didn't know was that this encounter would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Sarah's routine had remained virtually unchanged for the past 3 years. She woke up at 6 in the morning, even without having anywhere to go. She prepared strong coffee, sat at the kitchen table with a book she had already read, and reread the same pages, trying to find new meanings in familiar words. Afterward, she cleaned the house, although there was rarely any dirt, since no one besides her inhabited it. In the afternoon, she graded papers as a freelancer for some local schools, a job she accepted not for the money, which was little, but to keep her mind occupied. Her retirement income was modest, and bills piled up on the table. The house she had inherited from her father needed repairs. The roof leaked on rainy days, the walls were peeling in some corners, and the electrical wiring caused the circuit breakers to trip with worrying frequency. However, Banner's presence brought a welcome disruption to the established routine. On the very first morning, Sarah woke up to the sound of nails scratching at her bedroom door. "I'm coming," she muttered, still drowsy. Banner was sitting patiently on the other side, as if he had waited there all night. When she opened the door, he didn't bark or jump, just looked at her with those deep eyes and followed her to the kitchen. "You need a bath," Sarah declared, noticing the dirty and tangled fur. "And we need to check that paw." The bath was an adventure in itself. Banner initially resisted, but eventually yielded to Sarah's gentle touch, who discovered under the dirt an animal younger than she had imagined, perhaps about 3 years old, and covered with small scars, as if he had been through many battles. When examining the injured paw, Sarah found a deep cut, partially healed but still red and sensitive. Carefully, she cleaned and bandaged the wound. "Who did this to you?" she asked, feeling a wave of indignation. Banner just rested his head on her knee, in a gesture of trust that completely disarmed her. The following days established a new routine. Banner followed her around the house like a golden shadow. When she sat down to read, he lay at her feet. When she moved to the kitchen, he accompanied her silently. At night, he rested beside her bed, like a silent guardian against unmentioned nightmares. The only thing Banner didn't do was bark. Not once had Sarah heard him make any sound. Her silent dog for a silent woman, she thought with irony. On the 5th day during breakfast, Sarah consulted her bank statement and felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Without thinking, she muttered to herself, "How am I going to afford to fix the roof and still feed you?" Banner, who was lying near the table, immediately stood up and left the kitchen. Minutes later, he returned dragging an old book that Sarah hadn't seen in years. The Silver Treasure, an ancient edition that her father had kept as a relic. "What are you?" Sarah began, confused. She picked up the book, and as she leafed through it, found something she had completely forgotten. Between the pages was an envelope with $500 bills, money her father had hidden there years ago for emergencies, as he used to say. Sarah looked at Banner in astonishment. "How did you—" The question died on her lips. The dog was just watching her, with that serene and intelligent look that seemed to understand much more than it should. That night, lying in bed, Sarah heard the light rain that was beginning to fall. There was no more sound of drops falling inside the house. The found money had paid for the temporary roof repair. Banner slept on the floor beside her, breathing softly. "Who are you really?" she asked in the dark, not expecting an answer. And so the days passed, in a shared silence that somehow seemed less lonely than the silence Sarah had known before. But under this apparent calm, questions fermented. Where had Banner come from? Why had he chosen her? And why, with each passing day, did she feel that it wasn't just she who had rescued someone that night on the bridge? It was on an ordinary Tuesday that Sarah's life took another unexpected turn. She had gone down to Mr. Thompson's small market to buy food for Banner and some groceries for herself. She normally made this journey alone, but this time Banner followed her to the door and sat down, looking at her so eloquently that she gave in. "All right, you can come, but behave yourself." The dog walked beside her without a leash, but perfectly disciplined. He walked exactly at Sarah's pace, stopping when she stopped, turning when she turned. People on the street observed with curiosity. After all, Sarah was rarely seen in the company of any living being. At the market, Mr. Thompson raised his eyebrows at the sight of the animal. "I didn't know you had a dog, Professor." "It's recent," replied Sarah evasively. "Beautiful animal. Pure golden retriever, isn't it? Must have cost a fortune." Sarah just smiled without answering. While selecting some items on the shelves, she noticed Banner moving away for the first time, heading toward a woman who had just entered the store. The woman was young, perhaps in her early 30s, with dark hair tied in a messy bun and clear eyes that seemed tired but kind. She wore a white lab coat folded over her arm, probably coming from some shift work. Banner stopped in front of her and sat down, staring fixedly. The woman seemed surprised for a moment, then smiled and bent down to stroke the dog's head. "Aren't you a handsome one?" she commented, her voice soft and melodious. "Who do you belong?" Sarah approached quickly. "I'm sorry, he never does this. Banner, come here." The woman looked up and something strange happened. A sort of recognition passed through her eyes, although Sarah was certain she had never seen her before. "Banner?" asked the woman with a strange emotion in her voice. "That's his name?" "Yes, I found him recently. He was lost." The woman stood up, extending her hand. "I'm Emma Quinn, the new veterinarian in town. I arrived 2 weeks ago." "Sarah Mitchell, retired professor." Their hands touched briefly, and Sarah felt an inexplicable current pass between them. Banner remained seated, looking from one to the other, as if watching a carefully orchestrated scene. "He seems to be limping slightly," observed Emma. "May I take a look?" Before Sarah could answer, Banner had already extended his injured paw to the veterinarian, who examined it with skilled hands. "You did a good job with this bandage, but the wound needs proper treatment. I have a small clinic nearby. If you'd like, I can treat him right now." Sarah hesitated. She wasn't used to interacting with strangers, much less trusting them. But there was something about Emma that disarmed her usual defenses, and Banner seemed completely at ease with her. "How much would it cost?" asked Sarah, concerned about her limited finances. Emma smiled. "Consider it a welcome gift for both of you. It seems like you've both found something important recently." An hour later, in the small veterinary clinic at the back of Emma's house, Banner was resting peacefully while the veterinarian finished treating his paw with antibiotics and a new bandage. "He's an extraordinary dog," commented Emma as she worked. "Look how perfectly still he stays, as if he knows exactly what I'm doing." Sarah nodded. "He's different from any animal I've ever known." "You know, it's curious," continued Emma, now examining Banner's eyes with a small flashlight. "There was a case in my previous town, about a year ago. A golden retriever that helped find a child lost in the forest. The dog simply appeared out of nowhere, guided the parents to the child, and then disappeared." "Do you think it could be the same dog?" asked Sarah, intrigued. Emma shook her head. "Impossible to say for sure, but there's something in his eyes, an intelligence that goes beyond animal instinct. It's as if he understands every word we say." As if to confirm this theory, Banner turned his head and looked directly at Emma, then at Sarah, as if following the conversation. As Emma finished the examination, Sarah noticed a framed photograph on the wall. An older woman with the same eyes as Emma, smiling beside a golden retriever that looked remarkably similar to Banner. "Is that your mother?" asked Sarah, indicating the photo. Emma looked at where she was pointing and a sad smile appeared on her face. "Yes, Helen was her name. She passed away 6 months ago. That was our dog, Guardian. He died 2 weeks before her, of old age. They were inseparable." "I'm sorry," murmured Sarah, feeling a tightness in her chest as she noticed the recent loss in the young woman's eyes. "I came to Fairbrook to start over," explained Emma, absent-mindedly stroking Banner's head. "My mother always talked about this place, though we never visited. She said it was a place where people could find peace." Something in those words resonated deeply with Sarah. Starting over. Wasn't that what she herself had been seeking on the bridge that night? When they left the clinic, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Emma accompanied them to the door. "Bring him back next week to check the healing," she said, "and maybe we could have tea afterward." Sarah surprised herself by accepting the invitation without hesitation. As they walked home, Banner stayed between the two women for a few moments, as if somehow uniting them before following alongside Sarah. That night, as she prepared a simple dinner, Sarah realized she was smiling, a gesture that had become rare in her life. Banner watched her from the kitchen doorway, with those intelligent eyes that seemed to know exactly what was happening. "What are you up to, huh?" she asked without severity. The dog just wagged his tail slowly, as if saying that everything was going according to plan. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a strange feeling in her chest, something that took a few moments to identify as hope. The feeling was so unfamiliar that it almost frightened her. She sat on the bed watching the rays of sun coming through the window, creating golden patterns on the wooden floor. Banner wasn't in his usual place. Sarah found him sitting in the living room, staring fixedly at the old phone that rarely rang. She had barely finished preparing coffee when the device sounded, making her start. "Hello? Sarah? It's Emma Quinn. I hope I'm not calling too early." The veterinarian's voice on the other end of the line brought back that strange sense of familiarity that Sarah had experienced the day before. "No, it's fine. Did something happen?" "Actually, yes. Remember I mentioned bringing Banner back for a follow-up next week? Well, I've been thinking. There's a therapy dog certification program in the city, and I think Banner would be perfect for it. An evaluator will be in town today, and I managed to schedule an initial interview if you're interested." Sarah hesitated. Therapy dogs. That would mean more contact with people, something she had been avoiding for years. It would mean leaving her protective shell, exposing herself to the world again. "I don't know, Emma. I'm not sure if we're ready for that." "I understand your hesitation," replied Emma gently, "but I've already seen Banner interacting with you. He has a natural gift. And besides," there was a significant pause, "it could be good for both of you." As Sarah pondered, Banner approached and put his head in her lap, looking at her with those eyes that seemed to see beyond her defenses. "All right," she finally relented. "What time should we be there?" 3 hours later, Sarah found herself in the small town park, a place she hadn't visited in at least 2 years. Banner walked disciplinedly by her side without a leash, perfectly aligned with her steps. Emma was waiting for them near a wooden bench, talking to a tall, gray-haired man who carried a clipboard. "Sarah, this is Dr. Martinez, an animal behavior specialist and therapy dog certifier," introduced Emma. The man extended his hand with a professional smile. "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Mitchell. Emma has told me about your remarkable companion." The evaluation began simply, basic obedience commands, which Banner executed with impressive precision, despite Sarah never having formally trained him. Then Dr. Martinez simulated more complex situations, loud noises, sudden movements, strangers approaching, and Banner remained calm and attentive, responding appropriately to each scenario. "Extraordinary," murmured the specialist, making notes. "It's as if he's already been through this training before." The next phase involved interaction with volunteers who simulated different conditions: an elderly lady in a wheelchair, a man with crutches, an agitated child. Banner adapted his behavior to each person, approaching gently, offering silent comfort, backing away when necessary. Sarah observed with a mixture of pride and growing anxiety. With each passing minute, more people gathered around, attracted by the unusual scene in the park. Whispers and curious glances multiplied. "Isn't that the reclusive professor? I've never seen her in anyone's company. What is she doing here?" The pressure began to build inside her, a familiar sensation of tightness in her chest, breathing becoming shorter. It was too much, too many people, too many looks, too much exposure. Years of self-imposed isolation had made any kind of attention almost unbearable. Emma noticed her distress and approached discreetly. "Are you okay? We can take a break." "I think this was a mistake," whispered Sarah, feeling the panic grow. "I'm not ready for this." At that moment, Banner interrupted what he was doing and came directly to her, ignoring Dr. Martinez's commands. He sat in front of her, looking her straight in the eyes, and then gently pressed his head against her abdomen as if saying, "Breathe, I'm here." The gesture was so unexpected and so precisely what Sarah needed that she felt tears spring to her eyes. Instinctively, she placed her hand on the dog's head, feeling the comforting warmth of his body. Her breathing began to normalize, the panic receding. "Did you see that?" exclaimed Dr. Martinez, approaching with barely contained enthusiasm. "He identified your anxiety before any evident external manifestation. That's extremely rare, even in dogs trained for years." Emma smiled, but her look at Sarah was full of understanding. "Maybe we can continue another day," she suggested. "No," said Sarah, surprising herself. "Let's finish today." The evaluation continued for another half hour, with Banner demonstrating skills that impressed even the skeptical Dr. Martinez. In the end, he removed his glasses and cleaned them thoughtfully. "In 20 years in this work, I've never seen an untrained dog with such natural aptitude," he declared. With just a few weeks of formal training, he could be certified as an advanced-level therapy dog. But he hesitated, looking directly at Sarah. "The real challenge isn't with the dog, but with you, Ms. Mitchell. This work would require you to step out of your comfort zone, interact with various people, visit hospitals, nursing homes, schools." The words hit Sarah like stones. It was exactly what she feared, what had made her hesitate from the beginning, exposing herself to the world again, to people, to judgment, to rejection. At that moment, two obstacles clearly stood in her path: the deeply rooted fear of the outside world and the doubts about her own ability to change after so many years of isolation. On the way back home, Sarah walked in silence, absorbed in contradictory thoughts. Emma accompanied them to a certain point, respecting her mental space. "He sees something in you," said Emma softly before saying goodbye. "Something that perhaps you yourself have forgotten exists." Alone with Banner at home, Sarah sat on the porch, watching the twilight paint the sky. The dog lay at her feet, patient as always. "What do you want from me?" she asked in a low voice. "Why did you choose me?" Banner raised his head, looking at her with that peculiar intensity. At that moment, Sarah had the strange feeling that he wasn't just listening to her words, but responding in some way that she couldn't yet fully understand. A week passed since the evaluation in the park. Sarah had kept Dr. Martinez's card in a kitchen drawer, not committing to call, but also not completely discarding the idea. It was as if she were waiting for a sign, a certainty that had not yet arrived. Banner, for his part, seemed to have his own plans. Every morning, he brought something different to Sarah: a book she hadn't opened in years, an old photo of her smiling with her students, her old class notebook. objects that connected her to a more vibrant version of herself, as if he were methodically reminding her of who she had once been. On a particularly sunny morning, Sarah decided to do something she hadn't done in a long time: clean the attic. It was a space she avoided, full of boxes with memories of a happier time, when her father was still alive and her house was a home, not just a shelter. Banner followed her up the stairs, his agitated behavior showing unusual anxiety. In the dusty attic, Sarah began organizing the boxes, opening some, quickly closing others, when the memories became too heavy. At one point, Banner began to insistently scratch a specific box in the farthest corner. "What is it? What's in there?" Intrigued, Sarah opened the box and found her youth diaries, poetry notebooks she wrote in her teens, and at the bottom, something she had completely forgotten: a framed certificate from a literary contest she had won at 17. "National Young Literature Award," she read aloud, running her fingers over the dusty glass. How could I forget this? As she sat on the attic floor, surrounded by fragments of a life that seemed to belong to someone else, the phone rang downstairs. Sarah hurried down the stairs, Banner at her heels. "Hello? Sarah, it's Mary Edwards from Hope Haven." The voice brought a wave of guilt. Mary Edwards had been her colleague at school before retiring and dedicating herself fully to the nursing home she had founded on the outskirts of town. "Mary, it's been a long time." "Yes, far too long. Sarah, I'm calling because I heard through Emma, the new veterinarian, that you have a dog with potential for assisted therapy. We're desperate over here. Many of our residents are facing depression, especially after the visitation restrictions of recent years. We need something to lift their spirits." Sarah felt the familiar impulse to retreat, to invent an excuse, to protect herself from the outside world. But before she could respond, Banner placed his paw on her knee and dropped something in her lap that he was holding in his mouth, the literary contest certificate she had just found in the attic. The coincidence was too strange to ignore. Sarah looked at the certificate, then at Banner, whose eyes seemed to say, "It's time to come out of your cocoon." "Sarah, are you still there?" Mary Edwards' voice sounded concerned on the other end of the line. "Yes, I'm here. When would you like us to come?" The following afternoon, Sarah found herself in the entrance hall of Hope Haven, a modest but welcoming building on the outskirts of town. Banner walked beside her, impeccably groomed, wearing a blue vest that Emma had loaned, identifying him as a therapy dog in training. Mary Edwards, an energetic lady in her early 60s, received them with an enthusiastic hug that Sarah rigidly accepted, still uncomfortable with physical contact after years of isolation. "I can't believe you actually came," whispered Mary in her ear. "I've been trying to bring you here for years." "Let's say I had a bit of canine persuasion," replied Sarah, looking at Banner, who seemed to be surveying the environment with evaluative eyes, as if planning his approach. The first visit was organized in a common room, where 5 of the most depressed residents had been gathered. Sarah felt the familiar anxiety grow as they approached the door, but Banner pressed against her leg as if offering silent support. The elderly people were sitting in a semicircular configuration, some in wheelchairs, others in comfortable armchairs. Their faces showed various degrees of apathy and disinterest. The television murmured in a corner, ignored by all. "Everyone, I brought special visitors today," announced Mary Edwards with enthusiasm. "This is Sarah, an old friend, and her dog Banner." The gazes turned to them without great expectation. Sarah felt her throat dry, but before panic could set in, Banner took the initiative. With deliberately slow steps, he approached a frail lady sitting in the chair closest to the door. The woman, whom Mary Edwards had introduced as Mrs. Cecilia, had eyes clouded by cataracts and trembling hands resting on a crocheted blanket. Banner calmly sat beside her chair and gently placed his muzzle on her lap. The elderly woman's face transformed instantly. A light appeared in her eyes, and a trembling smile formed on her lips. "Oh, how beautiful you are," she murmured, her hands finding Banner's soft fur. "So soft, like silk." The dog remained perfectly still, allowing the caress, his eyes fixed on the lady's face with absolute attention, as if she were the only person in the world at that moment. "His name is Banner," said Sarah, approaching timidly. "He seems to have taken a liking to you." "I had a dog when I was a girl," said Mrs. Cecilia, her voice gaining strength with each word. "A golden retriever, just like this one. His name was Sonny. He was my best friend for 14 years. As Mrs. Cecilia spoke, Sarah noticed something remarkable happening around the room. The other residents were sitting straighter, their eyes focused on the scene before them. Some were even smiling. The apathy that had filled the room minutes ago was dissipating like morning mist. Banner, after spending some time with Mrs. Cecilia, moved methodically to the next resident, a retired military man named Mr. James, who hadn't spoken much since a stroke 2 years earlier. To everyone's surprise, after a few minutes of Banner resting his head on the man's knee, Mr. James began to speak haltingly about the service dog he had worked with during his time in the army. For an hour, Banner moved from resident to resident, somehow knowing exactly what each person needed, sitting patiently, offering his paw, or simply leaning against their legs. And as he did so, Sarah found herself drawn into conversations, sharing stories, listening to life experiences that spanned decades. By the time they left, the room was filled with laughter and animated conversation. Mary Edwards hugged Sarah again at the door, this time with tears in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what just happened in there?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Sarah shook her head, still processing the experience herself. "Mrs. Cecilia hasn't smiled since her son stopped visiting 6 months ago. Mr. James hadn't spoken more than 2 words together since his stroke. And Mr. Peterson, the gentleman in the corner, he actually laughed. I haven't heard him laugh in years." On the way home, walking under a sky painted with the golden hues of sunset, Sarah felt something unfamiliar expanding in her chest, a warmth that she hadn't experienced in a very long time. It wasn't just about what Banner had done for those people, it was also about what had happened to her. For an hour she had forgotten her anxiety. She had connected with people, had conversations, shared herself in a way she thought she had forgotten how to do. Banner walked beside her, his golden coat catching the last rays of sunlight, his steps light and purposeful. Every now and then he would look up at her, and Sarah could swear there was pride in those intelligent eyes. That night, alone in her kitchen, Sarah did something she hadn't done in years. She called the number on Dr. Martinez's card and left a message confirming their interest in the therapy dog training program. As she hung up the phone, Banner entered the kitchen and sat before her, his tail sweeping the floor gently. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" Sarah asked, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She knelt down and, for the first time since he had come into her life, wrapped her arms around his neck in a full embrace. "Thank you," she whispered into his fur. Banner's response was to rest his head on her shoulder, in a gesture so human, so full of understanding, that Sarah felt the walls around her heart, walls built over years of isolation and fear, begin to crack. The following weeks brought changes to Sarah's life at a pace that would have terrified her just a month ago. The formal therapy dog training with Dr. Martinez began, though it quickly became apparent that Banner needed minimal instruction. What the training sessions really provided was structure for Sarah, a reason to leave her house 3 times a week, to interact with other people, to step back into the world. The visits to Hope Haven became a regular occurrence. Each Tuesday afternoon, Sarah and Banner would spend 2 hours with the residents. What had begun as a one-time favor had evolved into the highlight of Sarah's week, a time when she felt truly useful, truly connected to something larger than her own pain. Emma became a frequent visitor to Sarah's home. What started as follow-up visits for Banner's paw grew into shared cups of tea on the porch, conversations that stretched into evenings, and a friendship that seemed to heal both women in different ways. "My mother would have loved you," Emma said one evening as they watched Banner chase fireflies in the garden. "She always said that the most interesting people are those who have known pain and found their way back to joy." Sarah had looked at her then, feeling seen in a way she hadn't in years. "I'm not sure I've found my way back yet." "But you're on the path," Emma had replied softly. "That's what matters." On a crisp Saturday morning, Sarah found herself doing something that would have been unthinkable just a few months prior. She was standing in front of a classroom at the local community center, with Banner by her side, addressing a group of potential therapy dog owners. "The connection between handler and dog is the foundation of effective therapy work," she explained, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Your dog mirrors your emotions. If you're anxious, they become anxious. If you're calm and present, they remain centered." As she spoke, Sarah caught her reflection in the window, straight-backed, eyes bright, gesturing with animation as she shared her experiences. It was like seeing a ghost from the past, the passionate teacher she had once been, before grief and isolation had dimmed her light. That afternoon, as she walked home with Banner, a car pulled up beside them. It was Mary Edwards, her face unusually serious. "Sarah, I need to ask a huge favor. Mrs. Cecilia's health has taken a turn for the worse. The doctors say it's just a matter of days." She's been asking for Banner. The old Sarah would have retreated from such emotional intensity, would have found a reason to say no, but the woman who now stood on the sidewalk with her golden companion nodded without hesitation. "We'll come right now." Mrs. Cecilia's room at Hope Haven was quiet, filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle hiss of oxygen. The elderly woman looked small in the hospital bed, her skin nearly translucent, her breathing labored. Her daughter Lisa sat beside her, holding her hand. When Banner entered the room, he moved with exceptional gentleness, approaching the bed with slow, deliberate steps. Without prompting, he rested his head on the edge of the mattress, close enough for Mrs. Cecilia to touch, but careful not to disturb any tubes or wires. The elderly woman's eyes fluttered open. A smile, weak but genuine, spread across her face as she recognized her visitor. Her trembling hand reached out to stroke his golden head. "There you are, my beautiful boy," she whispered. "I knew you'd come." Lisa looked up at Sarah with tears in her eyes. She's been talking about him non-stop. It's the first time she's smiled in days. Sarah pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed, Banner settling between them like a bridge connecting their worlds. For the next hour, Mrs. Cecilia drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time she awoke, finding Banner still there, that beautiful smile would return. As the evening shadows lengthened, Lisa stepped out to speak with the nurses, leaving Sarah alone with Mrs. Cecilia and Banner. The elderly woman was awake, more lucid than she had been all afternoon. "You know," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "he's not just a dog." Sarah leaned closer. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Cecilia's eyes, clouded with cataracts but bright with inner light, fixed on Banner. "Some souls are too good, too pure to stay in one form. They come back again and again to help us learn what we need to learn." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Mrs. Cecilia, my sonny was like that," the elderly woman continued. "And now you're Banner. They see us, really see us, when we've become invisible even to ourselves." Her gaze shifted to Sarah. "He found you when you needed him most, didn't he?" Sarah could only nod. Words caught in her throat. "That's what they do," Mrs. Cecilia whispered, her voice growing fainter. "They remind us that we're still worthy of love, even when we've forgotten how to love ourselves." 2 days later, Mrs. Cecilia passed peacefully in her sleep. When Sarah received the news from Mary, she sat on her porch steps, tears flowing freely for a woman she had known only briefly, but who had somehow seen into the heart of her relationship with Banner. That evening, Emma came over with dinner, a simple gesture of support that touched Sarah deeply. As they sat at the kitchen table, Banner lying between their chairs, Sarah recounted Mrs. Cecilia's words. "Do you think it's possible," she asked, "that some animals are something more?" Emma considered the question thoughtfully. "My mother used to say that love is the most powerful force in the universe, that it doesn't dissipate when we're gone, but finds new forms, new ways to express itself." She looked down at Banner, who was watching them with those knowing eyes. "If that's true, then why couldn't a soul full of love come back as a being perfectly designed to give and receive it?" As they cleared the dishes, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whether Banner was just an extraordinary dog or something more mystical, what mattered was the transformation he had catalyzed in her life. In less than 2 months, she had moved from isolated despair to meaningful connection, from stagnation to purpose. Later that night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she found Banner sitting by her dresser, looking intently at a framed photograph she kept there, herself as a young woman, standing proudly with her first published book of poetry. "That was a lifetime ago," she murmured, sitting beside him on the floor. Banner looked from the photo to her, then back again, as if saying, "Not a different lifetime, just a different chapter." Sarah stroked his golden coat, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "You know, Mrs. Cecilia was right about one thing. You did find me when I needed you most. That night on the bridge, I was ready to give up. Not on life exactly, but on living it fully. I'd resigned myself to existing in the shadows, letting days blend into each other without meaning." Banner's warm eyes met hers, filled with what could only be described as compassion. "But you wouldn't let me stay there, would you?" Sarah smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You dragged me back into the light, one paw print at a time." That night, for the first time since Banner had come into her life, Sarah invited him to sleep on her bed instead of beside it. As he settled against her side with a contented sigh, she felt the last of her walls crumble away. Spring had fully blossomed in Fairbrook, bringing with it new beginnings that seemed fitting for Sarah's transformed life. Banner was now a certified therapy dog, wearing his official vest with quiet dignity. Their visits had expanded beyond Hope Haven to include the children's ward at Fairbrook Memorial Hospital and a weekly reading program at the elementary school where struggling readers practiced by reading aloud to Banner, who listened with unfailing patience. Sarah's house had undergone a transformation as well. The peeling paint had been refreshed, the electrical issues resolved, and the garden, neglected for years, now bloomed with color. Emma had helped with much of the work, spending weekends with paintbrushes and gardening tools, turning the once neglected property into a warm, welcoming home. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in May, Sarah was preparing for a special event. The town library had asked her to give a talk about therapy dogs and their impact on community wellness. Public speaking would have been unthinkable just months ago, but now she found herself looking forward to sharing the story of her journey with Banner. As she arranged her notes at the kitchen table, the phone rang. It was Emma, her voice tight with an emotion Sarah couldn't immediately identify. "Sarah, something's happened. Can you come to the clinic right away? And bring Banner." "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. It's just, someone is here looking for Banner. Please, just come quickly." Sarah's heart raced as she drove to the veterinary clinic, Banner sitting calmly in the passenger seat beside her. Who could be looking for him? Had his previous owner finally surfaced? The thought of losing him created a knot of panic in her chest. When they arrived at the clinic, Emma was waiting outside, her expression a mixture of concern and wonder. Beside her stood a couple in their late 30s, a tall man with kind eyes and a petite woman whose tear-stained face lit up the moment she saw Banner. "That's him!" the woman exclaimed, her voice breaking. "That's definitely him." Banner, usually so composed, reacted immediately. He leaped from the car and rushed to the woman, his entire body wiggling with joy, emitting soft whines, the first sounds Sarah had ever heard him make. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she approached the scene. Emma placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Sarah, this is Michael and Rachel Anderson. They've been searching for a golden retriever that saved their daughter in the mountains last winter." Michael stepped forward, extending his hand. "Ms. Mitchell, I can't tell you what it means to find him. We've been looking for months." Sarah shook his hand automatically, her mind struggling to process what was happening. "Banner saved your daughter?" Rachel, who was now kneeling on the ground with Banner, looked up with tears streaming down her face. "We were hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Lily, our 8-year-old, wandered off the trail. A storm was coming in, temperatures dropping fast. The park rangers organized a search, but it was this dog who found her first." Michael continued the story. "He just appeared out of nowhere, leading me and the ranger directly to where Lily had fallen into a ravine. He stayed with her, keeping her warm until we could reach her and get her to safety. But in the confusion of the rescue, with Lily being airlifted to the hospital, he disappeared. We've been searching ever since, putting up posters, contacting shelters, offering a reward. Someone in town saw your picture in the local paper, the article about the therapy dog program, and called us." Sarah felt lightheaded, the world seeming to shift beneath her feet. She had known Banner was special, had sensed there was something extraordinary about him, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. "He's been with me for nearly 4 months, she said softly. "I found him one night on Willow Hollow Bridge. He was injured, alone." Emma, who had been watching Banner's joyful reunion with Rachel, stepped closer to Sarah. "The timing fits. The Andersons lost track of him about a week before you found him. He could have traveled that distance in that time, especially if he was injured." Rachel stood up, wiping her tears. "Ms. Mitchell, we can never repay what this dog did for our family. Lily wouldn't have survived that night without him. The doctors said her body temperature was already dangerously low when we found her." Michael placed an arm around his wife's shoulders. "We've come to take him home. We've missed him terribly. And Lily, she asks about her guardian angel dog every day." The realization of what they were saying hit Sarah like a physical blow. They wanted Banner. They had come to take him away. Her Banner. her companion, her savior, her guide back to life. Emma must have seen the devastation on her face, for she quickly interjected, "Why don't we all go inside and talk? I think there's a lot more to this story than we realize." In the small sitting area of Emma's clinic, the full tale unfolded. The Andersons lived in Asheville, about a 3-hour drive from Fairbrook. They had been searching for the golden retriever ever since the rescue, convinced he must have belonged to someone who would be missing him too. "We never meant to keep him," Rachel explained. "We just wanted to find him, to thank whoever owned him, to let them know what he did for our daughter. And to let Lily see him again," added Michael. "She's had nightmares since the accident. She keeps saying she needs to thank him." As they spoke, Banner moved between them and Sarah, as if trying to bridge the two worlds he had inhabited. His behavior lacked the frantic joy of a dog reuniting with long-lost owners. Instead, he seemed calm, purposeful, dividing his attention equally. "Have you ever owned a golden retriever before?" Sarah asked, a strange suspicion forming in her mind. The Andersons shook their heads. "Never," said Michael. "That's why it was so strange. This dog just appeared when we needed him most, knew exactly what to do, and then vanished." Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance with Emma, remembering their conversation about souls that return, about love finding new forms. Could it be that Banner wasn't meant to stay with any of them permanently? That he was somehow moving through their lives with purpose, healing what needed to be healed before moving on? "I think," said Sarah slowly, an idea forming, "that there might be a way forward that honors what Banner has meant to all of us." An hour later, they had crafted a plan that felt right, if bittersweet. Banner would go with the Andersons for a week to reunite with Lily, to bring closure to that chapter, for both the child and the dog. Then they would establish a shared arrangement. Banner would split his time between Fairbrook and Asheville, continuing his therapy work in both communities. As they finalized the details, Emma received an emergency call about an injured farm dog and excused herself. Shortly after, the Andersons stepped outside to make arrangements for their extended stay in Fairbrook, leaving Sarah alone with Banner. She knelt before him, taking his face between her hands, looking into those wise eyes that had seen her at her lowest and guided her back to life. "Is this what you wanted all along?" she whispered. "To bring us all together? To heal not just me, but them too?" Banner leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers, a gesture so tender, so understanding, that Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I thought losing you would break me," she admitted. "But that's not what you've been teaching me these past months, is it? You've been showing me that I'm stronger than I knew, that I can connect, that I can open my heart again." Banner's tail wagged slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'll miss you terribly when you're with them," Sarah continued. "But I'll be okay because of you. I'm not alone anymore. I have Emma and Mary and the residents at Hope Haven and the children at the reading program. You gave me back my world, Banner. And if sharing you with Lily helps heal her too, well, that's a gift I can give." When the Andersons returned, Sarah stood with newfound resolve. "There's something else I'd like to suggest," she said. "I think Lily should meet Emma too. She's been an important part of Banner's story here, and she might be able to help Lily understand the special nature of the dog who saved her." Michael smiled warmly. "I think that's a wonderful idea. In fact, why don't you both come with us when we take Banner to meet Lily tomorrow? It would mean a lot to have the complete story for her." As Sarah drove home that evening, the sunset painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Banner sat in his usual spot beside her. But there was a difference now, a sense of completion, of purpose fulfilled. "You know," she said, glancing at him, "Mrs. Cecilia was right about you. You're not just a dog, you're a messenger, a healer." She smiled through tears that weren't entirely sad. "And I am so very grateful that you found me on that bridge." Banner looked at her with eyes full of wisdom and love, and in that moment, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next, the gift he had given her, the return to life, to connection, to purpose, would remain long after his golden paw prints had faded from her daily path. The meeting between Banner and Lily Anderson took place on a sun-dappled morning in a quiet corner of Fairbrook Park. Sarah, Emma, and the Andersons watched from a respectful distance as the 8-year-old girl knelt in the grass, waiting with trembling anticipation. Banner, who had been calmly walking beside Sarah, suddenly stopped. His ears perked forward, his body tensed, and then, with a gentleness that belied his excitement, he trotted toward the child who had been the first recipient of his mysterious gift. "Angel dog," Lily whispered as Banner reached her, her small hands burying themselves in his golden fur. "You came back." What followed was a reunion of such pure emotion that none of the adults could speak through their tears. Lily wrapped her arms around Banner's neck, telling him in a stream of childish eloquence about how she had dreamed of him every night, how she had drawn pictures of him, how she had told everyone at school about her golden guardian angel. Banner, for his part, treated the child with extraordinary tenderness, licking away her tears, pressing his body close to hers, responding to her every word and touch with attentive devotion. "He remembers," Rachel murmured, watching the scene. "He absolutely remembers." As the days passed, the unusual shared custody arrangement took shape with surprising ease. Banner adapted seamlessly to dividing his time between Sarah's home in Fairbrook and the Andersons' house in Asheville. Emma helped coordinate his therapy work in both communities, creating a schedule that allowed him to continue his healing mission in an expanded territory. For Sarah, the initial pain of separation during Banner's weeks with the Andersons gradually transformed into something unexpected, a deepening of her own healing journey. With Banner's physical presence intermittent rather than constant, she found herself more fully embracing the connections he had helped her forge, deepening her friendship with Emma, expanding her volunteer work, even reconnecting with former colleagues and students. On a warm evening in late June, Sarah sat on her porch with Emma, sharing a bottle of wine and watching fireflies dance in the twilight. Banner was with the Andersons this week, but his presence lingered in the space between them. "I had a strange thought today," Sarah said, swirling the wine in her glass. "What if this was Banner's plan all along? Not just to help each of us individually, but to connect us to each other." Emma smiled, her eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. "My mother would have loved that idea. She always said that we heal better together than apart. I've been thinking about Mrs. Cecilia lately," Sarah continued, "about what she said about some souls being too good to stay in one form. I keep wondering where Banner came from before he found Lily, who he might have helped before the Andersons, and who he might help after all of us," Emma added softly. The thought hung between them, not painful but profound, the understanding that Banner's journey might someday take him beyond their lives to find others who needed his particular brand of silent healing. "I started writing again," Sarah admitted, changing the subject slightly. "Poetry like I used to. It's been flowing in a way it hasn't in years." Emma's face lit up. "Sarah, that's wonderful. Will you share some with me?" "Actually," Sarah said, reaching for a slim folder beside her chair, "I've been working on something special. The library asked if I'd consider putting together a children's book about Banner, about a golden dog who travels between communities, helping people heal. Lily's been sending me her drawings to use as illustrations." As Sarah showed Emma the manuscript pages and Lily's colorful drawings, a comfortable silence settled between them, filled with possibility and connection. What had begun as Sarah's solitary journey of pain had expanded to include a constellation of relationships: Emma, the Andersons, Mary Edwards, and the residents of Hope Haven, the children from the reading program, and at the center of it all, a golden retriever with wise eyes and a mysterious purpose. The following weekend, Banner returned from his time with the Andersons, bringing with him drawings from Lily and an invitation to her upcoming birthday party. As Sarah knelt to greet him in the driveway, she was struck by how healthy and vibrant he looked, his coat gleaming like spun gold in the sunlight, his eyes bright with intelligence and love. "Welcome home, my friend," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "Even if it's just for a little while." Banner responded by placing one paw gently on her knee, his gaze steady and knowing. In that moment, Sarah understood with perfect clarity what he had been teaching her all along, that love doesn't diminish when shared, it multiplies, that healing isn't a solitary journey, but a collective one, that sometimes the most profound connections come disguised as endings. That evening, as Banner slept peacefully on his spot on the bed, Sarah finished the final poem for her children's book. It was about a woman who finds a golden dog on a bridge on a misty night, not realizing that in saving him, she is saving herself. The last stanza read, "Golden guardian, wise and true, you found me lost, brought me to light. Your gentle paws left prints of hope on hearts once shrouded in deepest night. And though your path may someday lead to other souls in need of grace, the love you've woven stays behind, a golden thread no time erases." As she set down her pen, Sarah glanced at Banner, who had opened his eyes, and was watching her with that familiar, gentle intensity. Outside, the summer moon cast silver shadows across the garden she had replanted, illuminating the world she had rejoined because of him. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching out to stroke his golden head. "For everything." Banner's tail thumped softly against the bedspread, once, twice, 3 times, before he closed his eyes again, content in the knowledge that his work here, at least this chapter of it, was complete. And Sarah, watching the rise and fall of his breathing, felt for the first time in years the full measure of what it meant to be truly alive, connected, purposeful, open to both joy and sorrow. Whatever the future held, whatever paths Banner's journey might take, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she would never again stand alone on a bridge in the mist, unable to see the light beyond. Banner had shown her the way back to herself, and that was a path she would never forget. My friends, we have reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.